Ships arriving in Venice were required to stop first at a small island in the lagoon for centuries, before anyone was allowed near the city. That island was Poveglia. Beneath its soil may lie the remains of over 160,000 plague victims. Then came a mental asylum. Then total abandonment. Now it's called the most haunted island in Italy. But the documented truth is far darker than any ghost story. Poveglia sits in the south of the Venetian lagoon, a tiny low-lying wedge of land positioned between Venice and the barrier island of Lido. Long before it became associated with disease, this pocket of land was defined simply by its physical position. In a city built on water, control of the lagoon's channels was a matter of survival. As early as the 14th century, Venetian military engineers recognized Poveglia's location near the mouth of the lagoon, erecting fortifications to guard the maritime approach to the city. Its natural isolation made it a perfect defensive shield. This physical isolation, designed to keep invading forces out, would eventually make the island ideal for keeping something else in. But first, it was a place of soldiers and stone. Venice was an empire built on maritime commerce, its channels constantly filled with merchant galleys carrying silks, spices and grain from across the known world. But this vast wealth came with a devastating biological cost. Because Venice relied entirely on sea traffic, its crowded, waterlogged urban center acted as a natural gateway for infectious disease. In 1348, the Black Death swept through the city, destroying a massive portion of the population. When the plague returned in later centuries, particularly during the devastating outbreaks of 1576 and 1630, the Venetians realized that physical defense required more than stone fortifications. It demanded an organized administrative response to contain an invisible enemy. This recurring crisis forced the Venetian Republic to establish the world's first permanent public health system, overseen by a powerful governing body known as the Magistrato alla Sanità or the Health Magistracy. These health officials understood that stopping infection meant monitoring every point of entry. Rather than closing the port entirely and facing economic ruin, the Republic implemented a system of state-controlled isolation. At the heart of this policy was the Lazaretto system. Ships arriving from foreign ports were forced to stop at designated quarantine islands scattered across the lagoon before they could approach the city. Passengers and crew were kept in forced isolation for 40 days, giving rise to the term quarantine, from the Italian word quaranta. On these isolated outposts, cargo was systematically unloaded, cleaned, and exposed to the air, while anyone showing symptoms of illness was separated from the healthy. By turning physical isolation into institutional governance, Venice transformed its natural geography into a sanitary barrier, establishing a model of disease control that would protect the Republic for centuries. In 1776, the Magistrato alla Sanità officially designated Poveglia as a formal Lazaretto, drawing the island directly into Venice's public health machinery. From this point, the island served as a strict checkpoint. Every ship bound for the city had to anchor near its shores. Health officers boarded the vessels to examine cargo, inspect crew registers, and look for physical signs of disease among the passengers. Anyone displaying symptoms of the plague was immediately ordered off the ship and onto the island. For these travelers, what began as a commercial voyage or a return home became an indefinite period of confinement behind stone walls. The island was designed for separation, but during active outbreaks, it became a place of mass mortality. Those who died on Poveglia were buried quickly to prevent the spread of infection. Unlike the parish cemeteries of the main city, there were no individual headstones here. Instead, workers dug mass graves to handle the bodies, a practice common across the lagoon's quarantine stations. Today, travel guides and popular media often claim that up to 160,000 people died and were buried or burned on Poveglia. However, historical records and modern archaeological assessments do not support this figure, while excavations on neighboring islands like Lazaretto Vecchio have uncovered extensive plague pits. Poveglia itself has not yielded evidence of such massive burial numbers. Historians and researchers suggest the actual toll on the island is far lower, likely in the hundreds or thousands. The 160,000 figure remains a widely repeated but unverified estimate, a modern exaggeration that overshadows the documented quiet tragedies of those who actually spent their final days confined on this low-lying spit of land. Although Venice's massive plague outbreaks subsided, Poveglia continued to serve as a primary quarantine station well into the early 19th century. When Napoleonic forces dissolved the Venetian Republic, the island's formal Lazaretto operations finally ended in 1814. Yet the island's defining characteristic, its absolute physical isolation, remained unchanged. For decades, the empty stone structures sat quiet at the southern edge of the lagoon, shaped entirely by their remoteness. In 1922, administrative planners realized that the same geography that once made the island practical for containing infectious disease made it equally suited for a new kind of institution. The old quarantine facilities were systematically converted into a mental hospital. This transition turned biological quarantine into social and architectural containment, bringing a new collective human presence to Poveglia. These psychiatric patients lived their lives bounded by the same water that had trapped plague victims centuries before. Through this institutional use, Poveglia entered a second phase of confinement. The island's utility had not changed, only the nature of the exclusion had. Architectural spaces once built to guard Venice from physical pestilence were now used to keep those suffering from mental illness safely out of the public eye, continuing a long Venetian tradition of lagoon-based exile. The island's brick bell tower, once a lighthouse, is the setting for Poveglia's most famous legend. The tale claims a sadistic doctor tortured psychiatric patients here before leaping to his death from the summit. Yet the hospital's administrative files contain no such figure. There is no name, no medical record, and no municipal report of any suicide on the island. Venetian archives are entirely silent. Instead, researchers trace this infamous doctor directly to American paranormal television and internet horror forums from the early 2000s. This terrifying supervisor remains a product of modern entertainment, a convenient, fictional nightmare draped over a much quieter, documented history of human isolation. In 1968, the psychiatric facility on Poveglia shut its doors for the last time, ending nearly half a century of institutional operations. With the departure of the final patients and staff, the island fell completely silent, beginning a period of total physical abandonment that continues today. Over the decades, nature steadily reclaimed what human hands had built. Ivy and wild brush choked the decaying hospital corridors, while the brick bell tower stood as a quiet sentinel over the empty lagoon outpost. In this sudden void of disuse and isolation, the island's transition from lived-in reality to overgrown ruin was complete. Today, Poveglia remains strictly off-limits to the public, its decaying structures patrolled by Venetian authorities who act as custodians of a silent mass grave. The island's modern notoriety exists in a strange tension, caught between the documented suffering of those isolated here and the unsubstantiated ghost lore popularized by television crews. No scientific investigation has ever validated these paranormal claims, when sensationalized legends crowd out history. The real human tragedies of Poveglia are easily forgotten, reducing actual lives to mere campfire stories. To explore more forgotten histories of our past, subscribe. Today, Poveglia remains off-limits. While media crews chase unverified ghost legends, the quiet tragedy of those who actually suffered here risks being forgotten. Respecting their humanity requires remembering the real history, not the myths. To help us uncover more true histories, please subscribe.